Hi friends, welcome back. Govind this side. This is chapter 8 where we are going to look how to deploy multiple Spring Boot microservices to Docker using Docker networking. In previous lecture, we saw how to deploy single Spring Boot microservices to Docker container. If you are new to this channel, so I request you to go and watch my previous video. Then only you get the better understanding on this concept. Suppose the requirement is such that we may need to deploy multiple microservices onto the Docker container. For example, we have two microservices, employee producer and employee consumer. As name suggested, employee producer expose the REST API which will be consumed by employee consumer. But the Docker has been designed in such a way that it should have only one single service running. So we will be deploying these two microservices on two different containers and have them interact with each other. Okay, so let's start. First we will create the employee producer microservice, then we'll create the employee consumer microservice. After that, we'll create the Docker image of employee producer and Docker image of employee consumer. Once it's done, after that we will create the network and run our two microservices on the same network. So let's create the microservices first. Employee producer, add one dependency, Spring Web. Create one more microservice, that is employee consumer. Okay, so we have created two microservices, employee producer and employee consumer. Now go to the employee producer and add one controller over here. New Java class, REST controller. Make it as the REST controller. Add one endpoint here. Public string get data. Public string get data. Return this data generated by producer. Okay, this data is generated by producer. At the get mapping, add endpoint producer data, something like that. Producer data. Okay, so you have created the one REST controller. In this you have added one endpoint. Okay, endpoint is the producer data. When you call this endpoint, this producer return the string. So let's test this. First let me change the port number. So go here, add server dot port. I assign 5000 to my producer. Okay, so let's run the producer. Okay, now your producer is up and running on port number 5000. So localhost colon 5000 comma producer data, right? Endpoint name is producer data. What happened? The endpoint name is slash producer data. Okay, not producer data. Let's stop server and run again. Okay, run as Spring Boot app. Go to the browser and refresh the page. Not happened. Producer data. running on port number, oh, it is running on port number 8080. I provided the port number 5000, so let me do one thing. First build the project, go to the run as maven build, clean install, okay, make fresh build and then run, so that your changes is reflected properly. Okay, build is success. Now right click and run Spring Boot app. Okay, now check. Okay, now it is running on 5000, so go in browser and run. So this data is generated by the producer. Okay, so now this is the endpoint which is exposed by producer. Now the consumer use this endpoint, so go to the consumer and add one REST point here, REST controller. Okay, you can give any name, add the REST controller. Here add one endpoint, public string display producer data. Okay, consumer don't have any data, so consumer consume the data from producer. So for that we need to create the object of REST template. So create the object of REST template, REST template equal to new REST template. Okay, and call the REST template dot get for object and pass here the URL of producer. Okay, this is the producer URL, comma return type is string dot class. That's it. Okay, return. Here add mapping, add the red get mapping, consumer data. Okay, so consumer consume the data from producer. Okay, when we call this endpoint, okay, so this method call the producer endpoint or producer data. From producer, whatever result came here, that result we will get. Okay, so let's run the application. Okay, first let me check the port number. Okay, assign port number server dot port equal to 4000. Okay, let me build first, run as maven build, clean install. Okay, so in this consumer endpoint we add something here like consumer called. Okay, consumer called something like this. So let's run the consumer now. Okay, so your consumer now running on port number 4000. Okay, so this producer now localhost 4000 slash consumer data, right? Consumer called the producer API and this data generated by producer. Okay, so when we hit this URL consumer data, okay, so when we call consumer data, so consumer data call this producer API and producer generated result and we get the result. Okay, so in this way we create the two microservices, employee consumer and employee producer. Now to create the Docker image, we need to add the Docker file in this application. Okay, so let's add Docker file in both the application. New file, Docker file. Here also add new file, Docker file. Okay, now let's add the instructions in this Docker file. Okay, one second, let me see the instruction. So let's copy this instruction and paste in Docker file. This is the producer Docker file. Okay, so here I write the target slash producer. Okay, this is my jar name, and I copied same on Docker image producer.jar, and entry point is producer.jar. These all things we discussed in previous lecture. Okay, copy this also and paste here. Instead of producer, write consumer. Here consumer.jar, here consumer.jar. Okay, so go to the now form.xml, and I want my jar name is producer. Okay, so in your target folder your jar is generated by producer.jar. Okay, let me stop server. Go to the pom.xml of consumer, and here also pass the final name. Final name is just a short name which I want easy to use, easy to read. Final name is consumer. Okay, so now when you build your application, okay, so your the jar is generated with this name consumer, and here it's producer. Let's build the application. Clean install. Okay, build is success. Here also right click and build, clean install. Okay, now refresh the application. So in target folder here consumer.jar is generated. In target folder here producer.jar is generated. Why? Because in pom.xml we pass the name producer, that's why in target folder producer.jar is generated. And in Docker file we pass same name. In target folder producer.jar is present. Okay, that jar, same jar I want in my image. In consumer.jar is present, that I want in image consumer.jar. Okay, so we added the Docker file. Now let's create the image. Okay, so to create the image, open the terminal. First we create the Docker image of employee producer microservice, then we'll create the Docker image for employee consumer microservice. So first let's check the existing images present in our local system. So Docker images. So currently there is no Docker image present in our local system. So let's create the Docker image for employee producer. Docker build Docker image build 20, and here we need to pass the image name. So I want to give image name employee producer img. Okay, you can give any name. Okay, this is my image name, and now we need to pass the path of Docker file. So for employee producer, this is a Docker file and this is the path. So copy path of Docker file and press enter now. Okay, so there is something wrong in our Docker file. So let's go in Docker file. Okay, so here we miss the comma. Go to this Docker file. Here also we miss the comma. And here in producer, Docker file name is not correct. So refactor rename Docker file f should be small. Okay. Okay. Now let's run the same command again. Okay, so image is created for employee producer microservice. Docker images. Okay, here is one image, employee producer img. Now let's create the one more image for consumer, employee consumer img. This is my image name. And now let's pass the path of Docker file. So path of Docker file for consumer is consumer. Okay, so image is created for consumer also. So Docker images. So two images is ready, one for employee consumer microservice and one for employee producer microservice. Now let's run the producer. So Docker run -p. I want to expose the default port number 5150 and name of the your image name and name of the image. Okay, enter. So now producer is running on port number 5000, but we expose on 50. So just type localhost :50/producer data. Okay, so we get the result data generated by producer. Okay, so from producer we get the data. Now let's go and run the consumer. Docker images. Okay, Docker run -p. I want to expose the port number of consumer to 40 and here consumer image name. Okay, now consumer running on port number 4000 and we expose it on 40. So go and type localhost :40/consumer data. Okay, consumer data internally call the producer. So let's go into consumer. Okay, this is the this is our consumer data API. When we hit this REST API, internally this API call the producer data. Okay, so let's check, enter. Okay, the page is not working. Why? So let's go and check. Is there any exception? So okay, okay, sorry, my mistake. I started producer. So let's open tag and Docker images. Okay, Docker run -p 40 : let's expose on some other port number 30 : 4000 and this is a consumer. Okay, let's run the consumer. Okay, now consumer is running on port number 4000. So go here and I expose 4000 to 30. So we get the exception. Now this is the connection issue. Okay, connection is refused. So we created the two Docker images, one for producer and one for consumer, and two Docker images running on two different containers. Okay, so they are unable to communicate with each other. Means when we call the consumer call the producer, but producer not responding. Okay, so they are unable to call to each other. So that's why now we need to create the one network, and in same network we need to run that both container, consumer and producer. So let's create the network now. So before creating network, first we stop the all container. Docker ps, this is our running container, so docker kill. Okay, we can kill both the container. Okay, now both container are stopped. Okay, so first type docker images. Okay, so this is your image name, producer. So copy this image name now and go to the code, and instead of localhost now replace here image name. Okay, now create the build of consumer. Meanwhile, let's delete the this consumer image. We need to create new image now because we have some changes in code. So docker ps-a, first we need to delete the container. Okay, so docker rm. Okay, docker rm, delete the consumer. Docker rm, docker rm and consumer container. Okay, so docker images, now we can delete the image, docker rmi, and delete the consumer image and create new. Okay, now let's create the new image for consumer. So docker image build -t employee consumer img, and pass the path of docker file. So for consumer, this is the path, pass docker file path. Okay, so now a new image created for consumer. Okay, so now let's create the network. Docker network ls, this is the existing network. Okay, and now command to create network is docker network create, docker network create, and network name. So I will give consumer producer. Okay, this is my network name. Now check network created or not. Okay, so here network is created, consumer producer. So we created one network. Now we run our images on this network, means both images, producer and consumer, both images running on different container. Okay, but on same network. Okay, so just run the container, create, and directly I create the container and run the image inside it. So docker container run. Okay, docker container run. On which network you want to run this? So I want to run this on consumer producer network. So pass the network name. Okay, after that name. Okay, so in this network you want to run your image, so you can give image name here. Okay, so what name you want, what image name you want in network, that image name you need to pass here. So I want the image name as employee producer consumer, sorry, employee producer img, same image name I want here also. Okay, and I want to expose this on port number 50. Okay, I want to expose in port number 50, and finally we need to give the actual image name. Okay, let's understand this command. With this command I create one container. Okay, in this container I want to run this image. This is the image name. I want to run in this container, and I want to run this container in this network. Okay, consumer producer network. And in this consumer producer network I want my image name as employee producer img. You can change this name. Okay, enter. Okay, so let's check what is Docker container Docker container Docker container hyphen network. Okay, enter. Okay, so now your image is running or container is running on this network. Okay, this container is running on consumer producer network. Now let's run other image. So I want to give the image name on network is consumer. Okay, and I want to expose this on port number 30. Default port number is 4000 and actual image name is employee consumer. Okay, so now both images, consumer and producer, running on same network. Okay, so let's start. Let's check here. This is your producer. Okay, we get the data from producer. Now let's check the consumer. Okay, consumer call, this data generated by producer. Okay, now both microservices is communicate with each other. When we call consume data call the producer data, and we get this data from producer. Okay, so in this way, if you have more than one microservices, so you create the Docker image of that microservices and create one network and run that all microservices in same network. In this way we can communicate the microservices to each other. Okay, we can inspect the network also here. There is a lot of network related command. Okay, if you want to inspect the your data, so there is command like docker inspect network, docker inspect network, and you can pass the network name or network ID. Okay, so this is your network. In this network, this is the list of container. Okay, first container is running employee consumer img, and next container which is running employee producer img. This both container is running inside this network. Okay, network name is consumer producer, and inside this network what these two container is running. Okay, so thanks for watching. If you have any doubt or any suggestion, you can ask me in comment. Okay, thank you.